The first thing I saw wasn't the flames. It was the smoke. Thick, black, rolling up into the sky like something had gone very, very wrong. I was still halfway down the dirt road leading to my property when my stomach dropped, because deep down, I already knew what it was. There was only one thing on my land big enough to produce smoke like that. My truck. My semi-truck. And as I got closer, that gut feeling turned into reality. It was burning. Not a small fire. Not something accidental looking. This was full-on, aggressive flames climbing up the side of the cab, heat waves distorting the air around it. The tires were already starting to melt, and the smell hit me next. Burning rubber, diesel, and something metallic that made it all feel worse. I slammed the brakes, jumped out of my pickup, and ran toward it, but there was nothing I could do. The fire was already too far gone. Even getting close felt dangerous. I just stood there for a second, staring, trying to process how something like this even happens. Then I heard a voice behind me. Well, maybe now you'll understand. I turned. And of course, it was her. Standing near the edge of my property like she had every right to be there, arms crossed, completely calm while my truck burned in front of us. "What did you do?" I asked, my voice lower than I expected. She didn't even flinch. "I told you that truck didn't belong here." For a moment, I just stared at her, trying to figure out if she was actually admitting what I thought she was admitting. "You set it on fire?" I said. She tilted her head slightly. "I handled a problem the HOA has been dealing with for weeks." I let out a slow breath, trying to keep control, because reacting the wrong way right now would only make things worse. "You burned my truck," I said. "It was an eyesore," she replied, "and it violated community standards." I actually laughed. Not because it was funny, but because it was so completely disconnected from reality that my brain didn't know what else to do. "This isn't your community," I said. "I'm not in your HOA." She shook her head immediately. "That's not how it works. Your property borders ours. That makes it part of the visual zone." "The visual zone?" I repeated. "Yes," she said confidently. "Anything that affects the appearance of the neighborhood falls under HOA authority." I looked back at my truck, flames still rising, then back at her. "So your solution was to commit arson?" Her expression tightened slightly, like she didn't like the word. "I enforced standards." That was the moment it became very clear this wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't confusion about property lines or rules. This was someone who genuinely believed they had the authority to do whatever they wanted. "You realize this is a crime, right?" I said. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she gestured toward the truck. "You were warned," she said, and that's when I remembered. 2 weeks earlier, she had shown up for the first time. Same attitude, same tone. She had pointed at my semi-truck parked near the side of my land and told me it wasn't allowed. I had told her the same thing I was telling her now, that I wasn't part of her HOA and she had no authority over my property. She didn't like that answer back then either, but I hadn't expected this. "You think a warning gives you the right to do this?" I asked. "You ignored compliance notices," she replied. "I threw them away," I said, "because they don't apply to me." Her jaw tightened. "That doesn't mean they're not valid." Before I could respond, we both heard sirens in the distance. Someone had called it in, probably one of the neighbors who saw the smoke. The sound got louder quickly, and within minutes, a fire truck and a police car pulled up near the road. Firefighters rushed past us immediately, focusing on the flames, while one of the officers approached. "What's going on here?" he asked. I pointed at the truck. "That's mine," I said. Then I pointed at her. "And she just admitted to setting it on fire." The officer turned toward her. "Ma'am?" She didn't hesitate. "That vehicle was in violation of HOA regulations," she said. The officer blinked once, clearly not expecting that answer. "I'm sorry, what?" "It was non-compliant," she continued. "I took action." There was a pause, a long one, because even the officer needed a second to process what she had just said. "You took action," he repeated. "Yes," she said. "As HOA president, it's my responsibility." I watched his expression change slowly, from confusion to something else entirely. "Ma'am," he said carefully, "are you saying you started that fire?" She hesitated, just slightly, but it was enough. "I addressed a violation," she said. That was all she needed to say, because now it wasn't just my word. It was hers, too. The officer turned fully toward her, his tone shifting. "I'm going to need you to step over here," he said. For the first time since I'd seen her, she looked unsure. Not scared, not yet, but uncertain. Because suddenly, This wasn't about HOA rules anymore. This was real. And as the firefighters worked to contain what was left of my truck, I stood there watching everything unfold, knowing one thing for sure: she hadn't just crossed a line. She had destroyed any chance of walking this back. And this was only the beginning. The moment the officer asked her to step aside, the entire situation shifted from chaos to control, but not in the way she expected. Up until now, she had been speaking like she was still in charge, like this was just another HOA complaint she could push through with confidence. But the tone around her had changed. The firefighters were focused on putting out what was left of my truck, the air still thick with smoke and heat, while the second officer arrived and started taking notes. I stood a few feet away, watching, not interrupting, because at this point, she was doing more damage to herself than I ever could. The first officer spoke calmly but firmly, asking her to explain exactly what she meant by taking action, and for the first time, she didn't answer immediately. There was a pause, just long enough to show that even she realized this wasn't going the way she had planned. Then she straightened slightly and said that the vehicle had been in violation of HOA standards for weeks, that multiple notices had been issued, and that the homeowner, meaning me, had refused to comply. She spoke like she was presenting a case, like this was some kind of formal enforcement process, but the problem was simple and obvious. None of it gave her the right to touch my property. The officer listened without interrupting, then asked a question that cut straight through everything she had said. He asked if she had physically set the fire or caused it to be set. That question changed everything, because now there was no room for vague language or authority claims. This was direct. This was legal. This was real. She hesitated again, and this time it was longer. Then she said she had handled the situation, which was the closest thing she could say without fully admitting it again, but it didn't help her. The officer nodded slowly, then told her very clearly that what she was describing wasn't HOA enforcement. It was potential arson. Hearing that word out loud seemed to hit her differently than when I had said it. When I said it, she dismissed it. When he said it, it became real. Meanwhile, the second officer walked over to me and asked for my statement. I explained everything from the beginning, including the first time she showed up, the complaints about the truck, the notices I had ignored, and the fact that my property was not part of the HOA. I also pointed out where the truck had been parked, well within my own land, nowhere near any shared boundary that could even be argued as HOA controlled. He took notes carefully, asking a few clarifying questions, then nodded like he already understood where this was heading. By the time the fire was fully under control, what remained of my semi-truck was barely recognizable. The cab was blackened, the tires destroyed, the metal warped from the heat. It wasn't just damaged. It was a total loss. And standing there looking at it, I wasn't thinking about the argument anymore. I was thinking about cost, about time, about the fact that this wasn't just some random object. This was part of my work, part of my livelihood. The officer came back over and asked me directly if I wanted to press charges. I didn't answer right away. Not because I was unsure, but because I wanted to be clear about what I was saying. I looked at the remains of my truck one more time, then back at him, and told him yes. Absolutely yes. That answer seemed to settle something immediately. The officers exchanged a brief look, then one of them walked back toward her. She was still standing off to the side, arms crossed, but the confidence she had earlier was gone. It hadn't completely disappeared, but it was weaker now, replaced by something else. Something closer to concern. I couldn't hear everything they said at first, but I saw the moment it registered. I saw it in her posture, in the way her shoulders dropped slightly, in the way she stopped interrupting. Whatever they told her, it was finally getting through. This wasn't an HOA dispute. This wasn't about rules or appearances or community standards. This was a criminal investigation. A few minutes later, one of the officers came back to me and explained the next steps. They would be documenting everything, collecting statements, and possibly bringing in investigators depending on how the case developed. He also mentioned that her earlier statements, especially the ones made in front of them, would be part of the report. That was important because she had already said enough to create a very serious problem for herself. Then something else happened that made the situation even bigger. One of the neighbors from the HOA side walked over. He had been watching from a distance, probably drawn by the smoke like everyone else, but now he stepped closer and said he had seen her near the truck earlier that morning. Not just passing by, but actually standing close to it. That added another layer to everything, because now there was a witness placing her at the scene before the fire was reported. The officers took his statement as well, and I could see her reaction from where I was standing. She looked at him, then looked away quickly, like she didn't expect anyone to speak up. That's when it really started to fall apart for her, because authority works when people stay quiet. The moment someone challenges it, especially with facts, it weakens fast. By the time everything was wrapped up for the day, the situation had escalated far beyond anything she had imagined. The police weren't treating her like an HOA representative anymore. They were treating her like a suspect. And the HOA itself, the organization she kept hiding behind, was about to get pulled into something they probably didn't want any part of. As the officers prepared to leave, one of them gave me a case reference number and told me I'd likely be contacted again soon. I nodded, thanked him, and watched as they drove off. The fire truck followed shortly after, leaving behind nothing but the smell of smoke and the remains of what used to be my truck. She was still there, standing at the edge of the road now, not saying anything, not arguing, not trying to justify herself anymore. Just quiet. I walked toward her slowly, stopping a few feet away. For a moment, neither of us spoke. Then I said the only thing that needed to be said. "This isn't HOA business anymore." She didn't respond. She didn't have anything left to say. Because for the first time since this started, she understood something she should have realized from the beginning. She didn't have control here. And whatever came next wasn't something she could manage. By the next morning, the story had already spread, not just through the HOA neighborhood, but beyond it. People talk, especially when there's smoke, police, and something as visible as a burned-out semi-truck sitting on private land. What had started as her attempt to enforce standards had turned into something everyone was now watching. And she knew it, because she didn't come back that day. Instead, I got something else. A call. It was from one of the officers who had been there the day before. He told me they were moving forward with the case and that I might need to come in later to give a more formal statement. He also mentioned something important without going into too much detail. Based on what they had gathered so far, this wasn't being treated as an accident or a misunderstanding. It was being taken seriously. Very seriously. After the call, I stepped outside and looked at what was left of my truck again. In the daylight, it somehow looked worse. The damage was clearer, more defined. There was no saving it, no repairing it. It was gone. And that meant this wasn't just about principle anymore. It was about loss. Real, measurable loss. Later that afternoon, something else happened. 2 cars pulled up near the edge of my property, but this time, it wasn't her. It was 2 different people, both dressed more formally, both looking like they didn't want to be there. I walked over as they stepped out, and one of them introduced himself as a member of the HOA board. That alone told me everything I needed to know. They weren't here to argue. They were here to contain damage. He started by saying they had heard about the incident and wanted to clarify the association's position. That wording was careful, deliberate, and completely different from the way she had been speaking. I listened without interrupting. He explained that the HOA did not authorize any action involving damage to private property, that they did not condone what had happened, and that they were conducting an internal review. In simple terms, they were distancing themselves from her as fast as possible. I nodded once. "You should," I said. The second person spoke up then, adding that they had not been aware of her actions beforehand. Again, careful wording. Again, controlled. But it didn't change the facts. "She said she was enforcing HOA standards," I replied. They exchanged a glance. Then the first one said something that confirmed what I already suspected. She acted outside her authority. That was the moment it became official, not just in my mind, but in theirs too. They weren't backing her anymore. They couldn't, because now it wasn't just a bad decision. It was a liability, a serious one. We talked for a few more minutes, mostly about documentation, insurance, and the possibility of follow-up communication. They didn't argue. They didn't defend her. They just made it clear that whatever happened next, it wasn't going to be under the HOA's protection. After they left, I realized something. She had lost the only thing she had been relying on this entire time, the illusion of authority. Without it, she was just another person who made a very bad decision. 2 days later, I got the next update. This time, it wasn't a phone call. It was confirmation. Charges were being filed. I won't go into every legal detail, but the outcome was exactly what you'd expect when someone crosses that kind of line. Statements, witness accounts, and her own words from that day all came together. There was no room left for interpretation, no gray area to hide in. She had taken something that wasn't hers to control and tried to enforce it with damage. And now, she was facing the consequences of that. Not HOA consequences, real ones. Around the same time, I heard from one of the neighbors that the HOA had held an emergency meeting. It didn't take long for them to make a decision. She was removed from her position. No announcement, no public explanation, just a quiet change that spoke louder than anything they could have said. Because when something goes that far, you don't defend it. You cut it off. As for me, I started dealing with the practical side of everything. Insurance, reports, replacement planning. It wasn't quick and it wasn't simple, but it was moving forward. The difference now was that I wasn't dealing with interference anymore. No more notices, no more visits, no more claims of authority, just silence. The kind that actually means something is over. A week later, I stood in the same spot where my truck had burned, but this time, the space was clear. No smoke, no debris, just ground that looked like it had been through something and come out the other side. And that's when it really settled. This was never about the truck. Not completely. It was about someone believing they had power where they didn't, believing they could enforce rules where none existed, believing they could push until someone gave in. But there's a limit to that. There's always a line. And the moment that line is crossed, everything changes. Because authority without boundaries isn't authority. It's risk. And in the end, she didn't lose because I fought back. She lost because she went too far. How did you like the story? Please comment and like, subscribe, and share my YouTube channel for more HOA interesting stories.